Welcome to Intentionality with Paul Kempff, the podcast where we explore the possibilities and opportunities that can be created by a more intentional life. If you haven't yet, please subscribe, please follow us, please share on social media so we can reach more people and impact more lives. This is episode 32, and this is a special one. I want to welcome on the couch with me here today my next guest on IWPK, Marko Stavrou. Marko, welcome and thanks for agreeing to be with me here today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Marko, before we start the interview, before I start the questions, I want to do a brief introduction for our audience. I want to tell the audience something about you that has really impressed me. And that is from the first day that I met you. I was blown away by your age and what it is you have achieved already. I mean, here you're sitting with me. You're 20 years old. And in that first introduction, you told me that you started your first podcast when you were 12 years old. And then you went on to tell me about the companies you've started, the things you've done, the talks you've done, where you've been a guest. I feel so privileged having you here. But I'd love to know, what is it that you attribute this very early success in your life to?
Yeah, thank you so much, firstly, for having me. Big fan of your show and big fan of the company that you work for. So, look, there's a lot of things. I think firstly, actually God is a big part of my life. I think fundamentally understanding why you're here on this earth and your purpose and, reason for existence, that's like the heart of everything. And once you get to know me and once you kind of get to know my life, you'll see that money really doesn't mean much to me. I've been privileged enough to grow up in an environment where my grandparents came from Greece in the 60s and basically had nothing. It took them 3 weeks on a boat to get to South Africa and built an empire of different businesses. And so I've kind of still have that immigrant mentality in my own mind and that hunger. But at the same time, I don't have to work and have no financial pressure. So you really, when you don't have financial pressure, and people love to say like, we chase after money and everyone wants to make money. But when you get it, you kind of realize like, now what? What are you going to do? Wake up and do all day. And once you figure out that, that's what brings me the most fulfillment. And I think, so part of answering your question is, one is my immigrant mentality. One is my upbringing of how I've been, nature and nurture. And then the second thing is like just this desire to grow, this hunger, that I really believe, I don't know, I was just born with it, and it was ignited at 12 years old when I started my show. And there's a lot of people that are better salesmen than me, they're better entrepreneurs than me, they have greater resources, but they lack that hunger. And for me, that's why I attribute a lot of my success towards.
Awesome. Love it. How did you come to hear about IWPK, and what made you reach out to me?
Well, I've been in the media and social media space for the last 5 years. I posted my first Instagram post in 2015. And since then, I've just been constantly on LinkedIn, constantly on socials, constantly listening to podcasts. So I'm always looking for shows to feature on, for people to connect with that are like-minded, that are in the industry. And I came across your profile on Instagram and immediately got my assistant to reach out and check out your show.
Fantastic. There's one thing I forgot in the introduction, but I'm going to mention it now because I think it's important. Every single guest that I've had in my first 31 episodes was somebody I knew.
Yeah.
You're the first person that I met after you reached out to me after hearing the podcast. So that makes you unique.
Yeah.
You've already said about the podcast you've started, but I actually think you've moved on from that. You've done some other interesting things. Tell us about what it is you currently do. You've moved on from the podcast.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Sure. So to give you quickly a synopsis of the last kind of 5 years, I started my first business selling sweets and sneakers at age 12. I then went online on Instagram and I said to myself, what do you have when you're 13 years old? You don't have money, you don't have resources, you don't have relationships really, you don't have a network. The one thing you do have is time. And so I said, okay, cool. If I got time, I needed to meet potential investors, potential clients, potential people. So I started this show called the Young Entrepreneurs Network. I did 76 episodes. During high school, I would do it at night. I would do it, reach out to them on Instagram. And then that turned into a business. So a lot of those guests became my clients, and I specifically targeted certain people. And I got my first internship in the States through the podcast. So every opportunity basically came from the show. And then, I've been running businesses similar to the podcast agency, which is now kind of turned into a training business, which I'm sure we'll go into more since then. And I left high school and at the end of grade 11 and did Cambridge for 1 year, and then was the youngest person to be accepted into Henley Business School globally at age 17. And since then I've been studying there and working full time.
Wow. That's incredible. You make me jealous. I mean, you tell me all of these things, and I just go back to the fact you're sitting here and you're 19. I'm in my 50s. I'm on episode 32, and genuinely, I'm jealous of the success you've had. That's really amazing. You and I briefly met for coffee. It was a wonderful discussion. I immediately knew I wanted to have you on the podcast, and that's it. I would love it if I can get to know you a little bit better with our audience, with our viewers and our listeners today. Who's Marko Stavrou? What are you passionate about? What makes you smile? What makes you get up in the mornings?
Yeah. Well, I do love a good deal. Okay. And it's not from a monetary perspective, but just the essence of doing a deal. The fact that you have to negotiate, the fact that you have to chase after someone, like that's what really brings me so much joy and excitement. I just came from a lunch with a 72-year-old property tycoon. He's got over $1 billion worth of assets. And like the whole week, I've been looking forward to that meeting. Yeah. Besides from all the other great things that have happened, just to be able to engage with someone and learn from them. Same with our coffee. Yeah. It really, really excites me. So that's the first thing is this essence of learning and development. So on my personality psychometric testing, I do a lot of Enneagram and a lot of these different tests. And one of my biggest highs is the love of learning. And so when people say to me, what brings me joy, and, who is Marko Stavrou? He loves learning, he loves development. And then the second thing is he loves impact, and he loves to create value, create assets, create opportunities for other younger people, because it was so hard for me growing up in SA and I would go to events. So I've been going to events now, in-person events, consistently for the last 5 years. And still to this day, I'm like the only person under 30. And yet we've got this community and this people in South Africa, young people that are complaining that they can't find jobs and they can't find opportunities. But if you look just from an environment point of view, they're not desperate for them. They're not hungry. They're not willing to do the hard work that I know, like when you look at your first internship and your first job, many young people aren't willing to do that. And I think that's what's been the separating factor for me. And that's what I would employ young people to think about is, number one, what am I willing to sacrifice, and how hungry and dedicated am I really?
Amazing. There's something else that has just come up with me. The way you dress today, it really has an impact, because I often find when I interview people at our company for a position and they're still very young, I'm always underwhelmed by the way they look, the way they pitch up. And I mean, I could just compliment you on the way you pitched up for this interview today.
Yeah, well thank you. I've been wearing a suit since age 12. It's just something. So there's an amazing book called I've just gone blank. Give me a sec. Alter Ego, by I don't know his name, but the book's called The Alter Ego Effect. Todd Herman. And Todd Herman speaks about they did a science experiment with a bunch of children. So a group of children they had to solve a problem, and the one group of children were just normal, dressed normally, and the other dressed as their favorite superhero outfit. And the kids who dressed with their super favorite hero outfit performed better than the children who just dressed normally. And so for me, when I put on a suit, it's not actually about the way you perceive me or anyone. It's for myself. I'm stepping into a persona that is not Marko Stavrou at home, who's relaxed and is in a certain manner, but he has belief, he has conviction about what he does. He's not worried about other people's opinions. He's got self-esteem. And so this outfit and this persona is totally for my own self-belief and my own mentality.
I love it. It's almost as if it gives you power and confidence.
Well, especially when you're 20, and I always laugh, like if I was in your position, I wouldn't wear a suit, because you've got the opportunities and you've done the work and you've got the resources. But when you're a young person and you're trying to knock down doors, you better come with some sort of leverage. because otherwise you're not going to get through the gatekeeper and you're not going to get the opportunity. And so I'm always looking for ways, and this is where I'm competitive and it can be seen in a negative way, but I'm always looking for ways to differentiate myself and make myself be unique. And again, it comes back to like leaving high school. Everyone said I was making the worst mistake of my life. My dad was an old St. Stithians boy, so he wasn't for it. My grandparents for it, and I just have this craving to be different, to be an outlier. And I think that's what's really separated, my journey in many ways.
I think we're massively different in so many aspects, not just generationally, but there's one thing that I think we have in common, and that's that passion for learning and passion for development and having an impact. I love that about you.
Yeah.
So one of the things you said you'd want us to talk about was building the life you want. I want to use the word intentionality there. Would you agree with me that being intentional in your life is part of building the life you want?
100%. And I'll change the word intent to will. I had a meeting about 2 years ago, and I said to the guy, this is my business plan, this is what I want to do. And I said, I think I can do this. And he said to me, Marko, he took out his book and he threw it on the ground and he said, Marko, I didn't ask you, can you do it? I said, will you do it? And people are walking around on this earth saying they can do this, they can do the Comrades Marathon, they can build a business. But will you do it? Because most people won't do it. And I think that's something that I always now think about in my life. How intentional am I being about things, and will I do it? Or am I just saying it?
It makes me think of when I wanted to start this podcast. I firstly doubted whether I can do it, but at some point in time, I thought I could do it. It's possible to do it. But it's that, will you do it? Will you take that next step to actually get it going?
Yeah.
So talking about building an intentional life, social media can have a positive or negative impact in terms of building that life. I'm still learning how to use social media positively and what it can do for the podcast and what it can do for our business. How has social media impacted your life, and how have you used it in a positive way?
Social media has been probably, like you talk about luck. My grandparents had the amazing opportunity with property where, 30 years later, the property is 10x, 20x in value. Unfortunately, right now, the market isn't in many ways a buyer's market, and I will never have that opportunity again. But where I grew up and where my luck came in was with social media. And the fact that I could grow up with Instagram and LinkedIn and be able to access anyone in the world and be able to showcase myself in the most amazing way is like it changed my life, basically. And so, you like you said, you have to make a decision. Are you going to use social media to consume and to potentially harm yourself, or to create in a positive light? And so I chose to reach out to people on LinkedIn, on Instagram. I used to send 30 messages every single day out to people. Doesn't matter who they were. People with different types of businesses, people who work for NGOs. For me, it was all about, I had nothing. I had no resources, no information. And so I just needed to have coffees with people like yourself and get data and get opportunities. And once I speak to you, and then I speak to the next person, and I link it and I create the opportunity. And so, social media changed my life. I also got my scholarship to Henley Business School through social media. And that's one of the most amazing stories. I reached out. So this was during when I was finishing my Cambridge last year. And I reached out to one of the directors on email, and I said, I'd like to come to Henley Business School. And they said, absolutely not. You need a minimum of 5 years experience. The average attendee at Henley was 37 years old. I was 17. And I said to myself, okay, Marko, what are you going to do about this? Because I didn't want to go to Stellenbosch. I didn't want to go to the traditional route, because I knew that I wasn't going to be able to build the business full time. I would have to wait, till I finished my studies. And so I made the decision that I was going to interview the dean of the university on my show. And I stalked him on Instagram, and he had like 70 followers, and all the photos were like his family. And I sent him a voice note. And that was another thing I used to do. I used to send voice notes. Everyone sends emails and messages. I used to send voice notes and letters. I used to handwrite letters and send it to people. And I sent a voice note saying, my name is Marko Stavrou. I'm a 15-year-old entrepreneur. I've got this show, and I'd love to interview. And I didn't even mention Henley. And then we did the interview, and I mentioned at the end of the interview, I said, by the way, I spoke to so-and-so, and they rejected me and I'd love to come to the show. He basically takes his phone out. He phones that person right on the call and says to her, why, I'm speaking to Marko Stavrou, he applied, how come we didn't accept him? He said to her on the phone, no, he's got enough experience. He starts reading out my experience that I added on LinkedIn to her and basically gave me a scholarship on the spot.
That's a wonderful story. That is so amazing. I think it's something that can inspire a lot of young people. You know, you often get in a situation where you get rejected for something, whether it's a job or a scholarship or whatever it is. And it's so easy to give up. It's so easy to say, well, I wasn't successful. But this is clearly a great story of determination. Well done on that. You've been on an interesting journey building a business in Africa. What do you think it takes for young people, and what is it that they should know to be successful in building a business in Africa?
Yeah, so the African landscape is just so difficult compared to the States or even the UK or even Europe. And the biggest challenge is we have the scarcity mindset. So the environment is so competitive. Everyone is trying to beat each other or get that pitch because the market in many ways is so small, especially when you create niche businesses. And so, yeah, my challenge was basically, number one, just getting established clients. So Standard Bank was like my golden ticket to building my business. Once I closed them, everything opened. And I would have actually paid Standard Bank to be my client because it just built up so much leverage.
Yeah.
But yeah, like I said, like the challenges of collaboration and partnership. And I actually just signed, raised some money and brought in investors because I understand the value that like the network and the resources and the brand and the credibility is worth way more than any amount of money because that takes time and trust to build. And so I just, young people have to find great partners, work for startups, get the experience and get the relationships, and then try and solve something that's like, the market is really so hard to sell. Create products and services that people really need. And too many entrepreneurs that I speak to and I work with have created products and services that no one really, really needs. So if they are not desperate to buy a product or service, then rethink about, how you can develop the value proposition or change what you're doing. And I've learned that the hard way. I developed too many services and products that were just nice to haves, and people weren't willing to really spend money on them.
What you're saying really resonates with me, but it also takes me to the topic of generations. It's something I struggle with. I mean, I'm of a very different generation, and the younger generations, especially the Generation Z, is something that I'm struggling with. Understanding how they think about things, how they look at work. It's something even in this podcast that I'm struggling to think of. How should I change things also to appeal to a younger generation like the Generation Z? You wanted to mention something about Generation Z?
Well, firstly, who are Generation Z? Because you'll be astounded that I sat in many executive meetings and exco meetings, and the people who are leading thousands of employees don't even know who their employees are. And so Generation Z were born from 1995 to 2010, but it's less about the specific timelines. So the people say 1997 and there's different opinions, but what's more important is what we call generational defining moments and events. So those are the things that have really affected the way that each generation think. And for Gen Z, it was the 2008 crash, 9/11, COVID-19. All of these events affected how they see the world, how they approach relationships. What COVID-19 did to young people in terms of the way they engage in person and they view on, jobs all overseas and the gig economy. And so all of these events affect who Gen Z are. And like you said, they're very, very different in many, many ways. At their core, yes, they're still human beings and, there's a lot of overlapping factors. But in terms of the way that they approach work, for example, and the fact that they can apply to a job anywhere in the world, or they can earn, monetary value through gaming. I mean, if you talk to your parents about, what are their thoughts on gaming, they would have thought, number one, we didn't have time for gaming. We were so busy working.
Yeah.
And two, is that actually a place that you can earn money and real value? Or is that just like a joke and, it's like something you do for pleasure? So that whole world, that pleasures have turned into purpose, and those have got now monetary values. And most parents haven't recognized the fact that their children can earn in so many different ways, because that world is just so different.
I think there's a huge advantage to it for me, having you here on the couch today. I've got 2 Generation Z kids.
Yeah.
And maybe you can help me better understand them. No, I'm kidding. I have a great relationship with my kids. Well, I hope they think that as well. But that's really interesting about the differences in the generations. And speaking of the youth of today, you told me that they learn in a very specific way. What do you think the future of education looks like?
Yeah. So the teachers are really struggling at the moment. If you speak to tertiary and secondary educators, number one, to influence their young students is very difficult, discipline-wise, and just culturally, there's now communities for every single belief. And so to have a school, a system that believes in one certain value is now also very, very difficult. And these all affect the way that students engage and behave, and also addictions. Gen Z and there's no other way to say it. When you spend an average of 7 hours, the average Gen Z spends 7.5 hours on their smartphone, 2 hours on social media.
It's an addiction.
That's an addiction, right? And so how do you manage that when you're telling your child he can't be on social media or he can't play Roblox, but every single other child is doing it? Then they become isolated and they go through loneliness, which leads to depression, and how self-regulation. So a big thing that I spend a lot of time with parents is kids don't know how to self-regulate anymore. They can't deal with their emotions. And so, how do we navigate that? We have to start looking at like practical interventions such as Cambridge homeschooling and such offering my school still forced me to do science. And I had no interest in science. I wanted to do business and accounting together and I couldn't. So things like that are just like the world is changing. And then new age skills around coding and AI and even EQ and public speaking. Most schools don't do a good job at forcing children to do speeches, to articulate themselves, to have debates, because those are all real life skills. At the end of the day, we all engage with people. That's like the biggest. If you can understand people and how they work, you will win in business and you will win in life, because all the time, all we're doing is interacting with people.
I love the way you think. Something else we have in common. Didn't like science, liked business and economics. Of course, the name of this podcast, Intentionality with Paul Kempff. Is there anything you do in your life intentionally on a daily, weekly basis that contributes to your success that you can share with us?
Brilliant. So I've brought my book. So this is my journal. Every single morning I go for coffee to the same place with the same waiter, in the same restaurant, and I have order the same thing. And I do journaling, writing down my thoughts, ideas, and then just planning out my day. So what is my to-do list? What are my focuses for the week? So I only have 3 focuses every single week. 3 big things that I'm working on, and then subtasks around that. So that's something firstly I do every single day. And the second thing I try and do every day is learn. So every single day I want to try to learn something that I didn't know before. So I buy the Financial Mail and I buy a lot of magazines, inexclusive books, because I want to try and get off my phone and computer, which I'm on the whole day already. So I use these resources to learn something new every day, and then to journal something every day.
I love it. That is such a good tip. Thanks for that, Marko.
And yourself, what do you do?
I do exactly the same thing. Well, I don't do the journaling. The journaling on a regular basis is not something I do every day, but the reading, the learning, that is something that I'm passionate about. That is something else that we have in common.
What's your favorite podcast to listen to?
I'm going to share my favorite podcast briefly with you now, but it's actually a podcast I want to talk about in my next episode, the one after this one. My current favorite podcast is the one of Mark Manson.
Mark Manson, okay.
Don't know if you've listened to
it. I do, yeah.
Yes, that is absolutely wonderful.
Okay.
That is it for today, except for what I end off all my shows with, and that is a tip of the week. I usually give the listeners a book or a movie or a podcast that I've listened to that I have enjoyed, but I like it when my guests are here to do the tip of the week. Will you do the tip of the week for us, Marko?
I think my tip of the week is just do something that you've never done before. Whether that's reach out to an uncle, an aunt, read a book, play a sports game, just do anything. The biggest reason why young people get stuck is the lack of action. We just don't do anything. We're sitting at home waiting for life to happen for us, and we have to go towards life. So my tip of the week is just do something you've never done before. It can be the smallest thing, but hopefully it'll make a massive impact and change your life forever.
Thank you for that. I made a prediction at the beginning of the episode. I said this is going to be something special, and I certainly believe it was.
Amazing. Well, thank you for having me, and yeah, I look forward to many more conversations.
And collaboration.
Definitely.
Wonderful. That's it for this week. All that's left is for me to thank our production team, thank our sponsors, FFG. We're going to continue to build on this podcast and the impact that we can have with it. If you want to get hold of me, I would love it if you would send me an email to paul@iwpk.co.za. My inbox can handle a lot more emails, so please engage. All that's left to do is to congratulate yourself on making the choice of living a more intentional life, of being the architect of your success. Thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. And may the rest of your week be an amazing intentional journey.